Good afternoon and welcome. I'm Rob Hudson with the law firm Frost Brown Todd. I'm a labor and employment lawyer and a volunteer with the Northern Kentucky Bar Association, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the Northern Kentucky Bar Association Legends Series. In the Legends Series, we conduct monthly interviews of prominent attorneys in our region to provide information to the practicing bar, to focus on practice development, ethics, and honing our skills as lawyers. And so we have this privilege once a month to speak with outstanding practitioners in our region. At the end of the program, if you have questions, or during the program, you can present the questions using the question feature of our Zoom programming here. And I'll reference the Q&A at the end if we have questions, and we can cover them then. But it's such an honor to welcome our NKBA legend, Ed Massey, to the program today. And before I begin asking a few questions and essentially turn it over to Ed, I wanted to offer a brief introduction. Ed's had this extraordinary career in our region, practicing in Kentucky, Ohio, and Indiana for more than 30 years. And his practice has led him to litigate matters around the country. And he's founded his own law firm with his partner, Randy Blankenship. They have two offices. He has a varied practice, not just focusing in one area, but practicing in several different areas of law. And he's been devoted and committed to community and public service throughout his career, with more than 20 years of service on the Boone County School Board, now serving in the General Assembly House of Representatives, and currently chairing the Judiciary Committee. And I'm not going to go into all the other aspects of Ed's background and bio, because I'm hoping we're going to hear more about them today. But Ed, welcome to this program, and thank you for participating.
I'm delighted to be here. I'm a very big fan of the Northern Kentucky Bar Association. In fact, we didn't discuss it previously, but I served on their board of directors once upon a time. And I believe it's a great institution that is truly in the midst of an area that has a great local bar. I can say that I've been around the country, and I've talked to many lawyers around the country, and a lot of them don't have the same experiences with their local bar association that we do. So I'm very honored to be here today, and I appreciate this great opportunity.
Well, terrific. And I'm going to jump right in. And as we typically do with these interviews, Ed, we start at the beginning. And if you could share with us your upbringing and any early influences that led you down this path to becoming an attorney.
Well, I grew up literally a block from the office that I currently hold in Erlanger, Kentucky. My mom and dad moved here after graduating from Eastern Kentucky University in 1964, and they came north to get jobs in education. My dad's from Clay County, Kentucky. My mother is from Mount Sterling, Kentucky. And they indwelled in me very early on the importance of getting a good education. My dad often said, you can work with your head or you can work with your back. He actually was in the coal mines, and after spending a summer there, decided he needed to get an education. So they instilled that in me, and I went through public schools. I went to Miles Elementary, where my mom was a teacher. Went to Tishner Middle School, ultimately graduated from Lloyd High School in 1985. And then wound up going back to my mom and dad's alma mater, Eastern Kentucky University. Was there, wound up going there for English, but was more a fan of writing than I was reading English literature. So I wound up changing my major over to police administration. And I did that because it was taught by lawyers. And I had always dreamed of becoming a lawyer. And I'd always dreamed of being involved in a political context because I just enjoy working with people in the community. And so I graduated from there in 1989, and then was accepted at Chase College of Law, where I graduated from there in 1992. So I guess I'm right at 29, 30 years practicing since I got out. So my mom and dad were, as both educators, instilled in me two things that they said nobody could ever take away from you. And one of those things is my faith in Jesus Christ, and the second is my education. And so those are the two foundations I firmly try to live up to, because I know when I leave this world, whenever that is, I'm not going to take anything with me. All that's going to matter is the difference I've made in the lives of people around me, or the people in my community. And as a educator, lawyer, I've been able to do that. So I've been very, very blessed and very honored to fill those positions. And so they instilled that in me. I had the other thing I did that was kind of unique. I got married very young. I met my wife at 15. We got married at 20 after our junior year at Eastern Kentucky University. And to show you how you go back to your roots, I was actually, we lived at the Baptist Student Union, and I was the janitor, or the custodian. And in return for being the janitor custodian, I got the apartment where my wife and I lived. But when we moved to Northern Kentucky the following year, my wife was one of those people. She just went straight to work. She worked at a bank and worked at St. Elizabeth Hospital. Ultimately was the assistant to Garen Colvin, who's now the CEO. But she worked her way while I was in law school, and allowed me to get that under my belt. And then we started our pathway down to where we are today.
Well, and it is interesting. Many of the legends we've interviewed had educators, or have educators as parents, and so that seems to be a common theme. And another common theme that you're sort of referencing here is that you've developed, and we'll talk about your practice development more later, but one of the terrific things about your approach is that your practice built up and developed around your passions and interests. So it's great blessing when that kind of life and professional experience can meld together, and then you find a greater purpose through the practice of law. And so that's one of the most interesting things I think about your path as it's developed. But did you always want to be a lawyer? Were you always sure about that, or was it a kind of a disconnected, different kind of path for you?
There were only three pathways that I ever really considered. When I was in high school, and I tried to debate, or was on the fence between going into medicine or going into law. Ironically, one of my best friends is a physician here in Northern Kentucky. And I always kid him because we had anatomy class together, and I got the highest grade in anatomy and got the anatomy award, and I became a lawyer and he became a doctor. But the paths worked out beautifully. And so, I went through that process. I also considered, when I was in law school, becoming an educator like my parents, because I substitute taught my way through law school. So for 5 years, I would substitute teach by day, and I went to Chase's part-time law at night. And so I taught either in Boone County or in Covington, Kentucky, and I loved it. But something happened when I graduated from law school. I was involved in a case involving somebody very close to me that was an educator. And in representing them, along with a colleague, which was Phil Tolliver at the time, who mentored me in that experience, I found out I could have as much impact on education through the law as I could have being in the classroom. And I probably would be able to take better care of my family as well. And so that was the motivation that I used to fulfill that dream. And by being on my own for so many years, it gave me the flexibility to do the things I wanted to do, like running for the school board in 1996. So again, the law gave me that opportunity because of the flexibility of how you can create your practice. You can go any direction you want. You can work with a big firm. You can be on your own. I elected to be on my own, and it's worked out beautifully. Now, at first, I didn't know that, because at first I was basically lifeguarding and managing the Triple E Swim Club, coaching football and practicing law, just trying to make a living. But my mantra with that was I did that because when I started, I didn't have anything anyway. So I'm like, well, if I go to a firm and I make a fixed salary, and then I want to go back out on my own later, it might be much more difficult because you get accustomed to having that set salary. So I'll just start when I have nothing and just see where it goes from there. And that's kind of what I did.
Well, that idea. So right out of law school, what did you just go get office space somewhere and hang a shingle, or I mean, for me, and you know, I've been with firms my life, and I that's a different approach, and I'm very respectful, and there's some admiration for people who have the guts to take that approach. Is that sort of what you did?
It is. I actually have met a gentleman named Ron Adams, who's a lawyer, bankruptcy lawyer here in Northern Kentucky, and we got to be friends. And he had a building which is literally across the street from my present office, and he was able to give me some space in the basement of that building. And so I did have some good relationships. The gentleman that wrote my letter to be accepted into Chase is now my law partner, Randy Blankenship, who jokingly says that's the only thing they've ever asked him to rescind. Not true, but so I got out and I started picking up things, and then I would call attorneys that I knew or people that I knew and work with them, and they helped me understand what being a lawyer was all about. Because when you graduate from law school, you may know how to research law, but you don't know how to go file your cases at the courthouse, or you didn't know how to go look things up. And so Randy was a great help to me, as was Phil Tolliver. And down the road, I went and met with and worked with Dick Lawrence and Bob Sanders and some of those folks. And so they became kind of a collective group of mentors to me that I could call on anytime I needed. But when I first started out, that's how I did it. I started in bankruptcy because it was a way to make a living in the sense that it's cash flow. And so bankruptcy and some small criminal cases were the way to keep the flow coming in to pay your day-to-day bills. And eventually that morphed into other things like personal injury and Social Security and some of the other areas of work I do. So I never wanted to be in one role all the time, where I went and just did one kind of law from 8 o'clock in the morning till 8 o'clock at night. I wanted to have a variety because I like meeting new people. I like having new experiences, and I like new challenges. And so being on my own afforded me that opportunity.
Well, you were mentioning what I consider litigation giants in Northern Kentucky, and you're starting your own firm. How do you link to these guys like Phil Tolliver and the others? And how did you? I mean, did you literally just bring in a case or had an opportunity for a case, and you'd call them up and say, "Would you do this with me?" Or how did that come about?
Well, I had known Phil a little bit through my father. My dad had been in Covington and knew Phil, and I think he was at the time was with on his own, and then he ultimately became partners with Bob Karen, and Bob was with Dick Slukich. Well, my dad was good friends with Dick Slukich. So through that, just relationships my dad had built, I met Phil, and I had this matter that I mentioned before involving an educator shortly right out of law school, and so he was the person I knew. And so he called, I'll never forget it. He called me up and he said, "Now you're going to do all the work, and I'm going to take all the credit." And anyway, he worked with me. Actually, in that case, I served 71 subpoenas on my own at the direction and under the tutelage of Phil. And that was just a great opportunity. And Phil then was able to introduce me to other people in his firm, to Bob Karen and to some of those other people that I would not hesitate to pick up the phone and call them as a young lawyer and say, "Hey, I'm brand new. I need some help here. Can you give me some experience, some guidance?" And they were more than happy to do that. Over time, that morphed into me getting to meet Bob and actually another person that I met, Kevin Murphy, was the person that very early on got me involved in the Inn of Courts years ago. And so I would go to those dinners and I would meet all of these and kind of be in awe of all of these practitioners that had done these huge cases, from Andy Buzald to Bob Sanders, to Phil Tolliver, to all these people and these judges that I would meet there. And so I just got the mindset of, this isn't all about me. I don't have so much pride that I wouldn't go to somebody and ask for help. And so when I did ask them for help, they were very kind to bring me in. Bob brought me in, and actually Dick Lawrence brought me in on a couple of cases where they would just split the fees with me and they would let me learn. And so that's what I did. And frankly, that made me a better person. I understood the differences between them, but I also understood the hard work that it takes to be successful in this practice.
Well, and starting with no practice, how did you develop, what exists today with your firm with 2 offices and associates and such? Where did you start and how did it progress?
Well, back then there was a lot of faith. When I said I had faith, I had to have faith because, I'll never forget way back then when I was doing bankruptcy, I took out the back page of the Cincinnati, Northern Kentucky Yellow Pages. And I'll never forget. And it was probably in like 1993. And it was going to be $900 a month.
Yeah, that's a big buy. That's a very big buy.
Yeah, and I'm like, man, that $900 a month, I don't know if I can do that or not, but I'm going to have faith and do it. And I did it, and I got involved in that advertising. And by the end of the time, when the print books kind of went out, I think I could have been a marketer for them because I kind of knew their deadlines. I kind of knew, how they did their different quarter spreads and full pages and half pages. And it actually was a very good experience. And what happened, though, is I would get all these calls that come in. And I would deal with people from all walks of life, from the poorest of the poor to the very wealthy people that had gotten themselves in some precarious situations. And so I learned to communicate with people from all walks of life. And I think that very much benefited me in my practice. I just tried to be me. And I didn't try to be Phil Tolliver, or didn't try to be Dick Lawrence or Bob Sanders. I just tried to be me. But being me, I had to rely on some people that had a lot greater knowledge and experiences than I did. So I just started literally building my practice one case at a time, but I wasn't afraid to take on new cases. I wasn't afraid to say, well, I really didn't have any experience in that area, so I'm not going to do that. I would just jump in, go find me somebody that had that experience and just go with it. And I felt like when you dig like that and you work, I worked back then, I worked a lot longer hours than they do now. I used to say I used to be able to pull all-nighters. And today I can barely pull all dayers. But back then it wasn't uncommon for me to work till, 1 or 2 in the morning. And I had another friend named Tom Condit over in Ohio. And when I would call Tom at 2 in the morning to leave a message, he would answer the phone. And we both were young lawyers, and we both just were hungry to make things work. And so you found creative ways to do that. I learned everything from the advertising mode to shopping for malpractice insurance, to understanding how phone lines work, and all of the different nuances that go with creating a new practice. So, and I learned it literally from floor up. So I started with nothing and then built upon that. And I've been very blessed and enriched ever since.
Well, and don't, part of building that sort of practice and the commitment to hours, if someone presented that opportunity, it would depend on your approach. I guess embracing the commitment to working those kinds of hours is not something that's for everybody, but it sounds like a lot of it maybe wasn't so much work to you, that it was meshing with your life goals and your professional goals, and maybe that made it easier. But looking back on those long hours, do you have all fond memories or maybe some mixed memories, or what?
Well, I mean, I don't regret it. I mean, I really don't. I learned so much from those experiences. They made me, I feel like, a better person, a better human being. I thought that's what you had to do as a lawyer, to be candid. I see these people, my friends that would graduate and they go to work for a law firm, and they were working, countless hours to try to get their billable hours in and all of this. And so I'm like, well, I'll do that too, but I get to make my own decisions. And so that's kind of what I did. And it gave me the flexibility to go out and experiment and experience things that I otherwise may not have been able to do. And so, I would I'll never forget when I guess it was my second child, one of my children was born. I left after the baby was born. I went and did a Social Security hearing or unemployment hearing, and then came back to the hospital. And I just thought that's kind of how you did things. I don't have any regrets from that at all. But it did, I always felt like if you put in more time and you're diligent in your efforts and you try to do the right things, you got to work harder than everybody else, or you won't move up the ladder. And not that I was better than anybody else, or, I felt like what I lacked in maybe intellectual ability, I could make up in work ethic. And so that's kind of how I pressed myself. And I just, worked through that process, and with the mantra that I'll do anything it takes to succeed.
Well, and on the community side of things, at about what point in time in your career did you start to become involved in the community, and that would naturally develop into leadership posts and such? If you could help our and this program is principally designed for newer lawyers who are trying to figure out how their respective practices will work. And I think hearing from someone like you who started at zero and then developed the practice partly through community involvement is pretty helpful. So if you could provide kind of an overview of that, that'd be
Sure.
terrific.
When I was a senior at Eastern Kentucky University, I became an EMT, an emergency medical technician. And so in addition to substitute teaching, I also was an EMT and ran for the Crescent Springs Villa Fire Authority, and as an EMT firefighter. And then I also mentioned it before, I coached football. So those relationships and being in that community environment, of course, they worked with a commission and all those kind of things. And you had fire department protocols and training requirements and all of that. I did all of that. And then I told you I coached football. So I had this student that I coached that ultimately wound up walking on at Penn State and becoming their punter, and with a team that included Joey Jaravicius, Courtney Brown, LeVar Arrington, all of those guys. So me, being the opportunist that I was, I went to DC and took an examination on the collective bargaining agreement for the NFL to become an NFL agent. And I did that for a couple of years. And so again, every opportunity that came before me, I just tried to seize that opportunity. I got involved in Rotary. I got involved in the Chamber of Commerce. In 1996, based on my educational upbringing and the experience that I had with that representation I told you about with Mr. Tolliver, I went up running for the school board and got elected. And so I enjoyed that, and I became elected to a school board that back then had 8,500 students, I think is what it was when I took that position. When I left it 22 years later, they had 24,000. And
Wow.
So I was thrown into this fire that Boone County became the third largest district in the state, only behind Jefferson County and Fayette County. But at all times I was engaged in the community. We'd have forums and we'd have these board meetings where all these parents would come, and you were dealing with their most prized possession, and I believe our most valuable natural resource, and that's their children, our future leaders. And so I engaged in these discussions. I worked with parents, and ultimately my practice allowed me to do that, because a lot of people wouldn't have allowed you to give the time that I gave to that process. Well, fast forward in 2007, 2008, I had the privilege of serving as the Kentucky School Board Association president. And so that represented all of the school boards in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. And so that was additional work. And I was on that board as well as my local board. And then in 2012, I became the national president for the National School Boards Association that represented 95,000 school board members. And in that time, in addition to practicing law, I traveled to 43 states and 8 countries speaking on education. And so all of those experiences were just invaluable to me about meeting new people and hearing new stories and how people did things in other areas of the state, or how people did things in other areas of the country and the world. And I realized how richly blessed I was to be here in Northern Kentucky amidst so many good people that were willing to help me. And these experiences just were like a building blocks upon one another to help me ultimately get to where I am today. So I don't regret any of them. And they've all contributed to what I believe to be, in my own mind at least, successful time as a lawyer and as a board member. And again, like I said before, when I leave this world, all this stuff, all this, awards, anything you get like that is going to perish. All that's going to matter is what I've done for people, or how I've made a difference in somebody else's life, how I made them feel. That saying always is, people will forget many things, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. And so as a lawyer, as a board member, as a community member, I just try to live a life that's full of optimism and encouragement, and trying to help people see that there are ways to navigate through what can be very complicated problems. And if you persist in that, then it will make you a better person.
One thing from a practice development standpoint, it sounds like a lot of the activities you engaged in were regular recurring type activities like Rotary, Optimist Club, school board, where, it's, you meet someone for the first time, and you briefly chat with them, they're not likely to become your client. But if they have more sustained exposure, they may think of you first, or you may be on their short list. And, especially when you interact with so many people, you only need a very small segment of those people to become your clients, to develop a successful practice. And so I was curious as to whether, and I recognize that a lot of what you did was not necessarily strategic from a business standpoint, because you want to follow your heart and become involved in things that you love. But in terms of developing clients, was a lot of it just the recurring contact with people? And if they were pleased with how you were handling certain matters, they would naturally pick up the phone to call you when they needed something legally? Is that the typical approach?
Yeah. So when I started practicing, my goal was, if you take care of people and their small things, then they will trust you with their big things. And I never limited my practice to just one area or one type of thing. If somebody had an issue, I said, well, I haven't had that experience, but I guarantee I can find out. And then I would reach out to somebody that had more experience or more exposure than I did. And I would work with them to try to solve these problems. Well, when people see that you're committed to doing that you're committed to helping them, that's really what they want. I mean, you're not, as a lawyer, your job is to advise them. Your job is not necessarily to solve every problem, but if you help them solve their problems, the old saying is if you help enough people to get what they want, you can have anything in life that you want. And so I just work with people and continue to nurture those relationships. You have to return calls, you have to, communicate with your clients. And I always tell people that the best thing I can say about marketing your practice is to be civil, treat people with respect and dignity that they all deserve, to communicate with them. They want to hear from you. If they're entrusting you with their problems, especially when it comes to, injury cases or domestic matters, they're entrusting you with something very personal to them. So you have to communicate with them and keep them engaged in the process. And then I try to follow up with them. So I try to, I become friends with many of my clients, because it's a relationship that, will come and will be there for your career. And now, not all clients are like that. Some are just wanting to take care of an immediate matter and move on. But a lot of the people become your colleagues in the sense of, if they have a legal issue, or should their friends have a legal issue, you're going to be the first person that comes to their mind. And I think that's how I've chosen to build my practice over the years. I mean, we have done advertising like a lot of people have. I've never done TV. I've only done print, and now we use Thomson Reuters and FindLaw that way. And that's more about exposure. The world has changed. It used to be that everybody had a phone book, and I used to get in those little books down in Grant, Gallatin, and Pendleton, and those were great resources. Well, now everybody's got a phone, so it's either Facebook or it's Twitter or something like that. So we do have that media footprint that we've created, but by and large, the best clients you get in the majority of circumstances are those that are referrals. Either those relationships I told you with those other lawyers, they referred me cases, because some of them got to the point they would only do catastrophic cases. So if they had a smaller case, they'd refer it to me. And I'm like, okay, well, I'll be glad to take care of that. And I was honored to be entrusted with that. And then I just kind of built upon that. And then I think you have to be opportunistic. There's several areas of my practice that I've gotten into just by being at the right place at the right time. So I represented, as a school board member, the Marine Corps was having trouble getting access to schools in order to recruit people for the military. So as a board member, I helped them accommodate that and accomplish that. Well, they wound up coming to me for their small matters. Well, then I had a gentleman that got in a pretty serious matter, and he was facing a court martial. And I agreed to represent him, and wound up doing a trial at Parris Island, South Carolina, representing a military member who was charged with a very serious offense. The case went to trial. He was convicted, but then we were able to get his conviction overturned by arguing to the Court of Appeals for the Armed Forces that there was unlawful command influence by the Commandant of the Marine Corps, which was a huge matter because that's a presidential appointment. And by that court ruling that way, it meant that we had called him on something very significant. So in much like civil work here, where you have or even criminal work, where you have a jury trial, they have panels, but those panels are made up of their military members. And so this commandant was going around basically giving instruction to these potential panel members or jurors, to the point that you couldn't get a fair hearing. So again, it was an opportunity. I seized upon it, wasn't afraid to do it, got into it, talked to people, did it, some kind of trial by fire. And since then, I've done a number of those. I've gotten licensed in the Navy Marine Corps Court of Criminal Appeals, the Navy Court of Criminal Appeals, I already said that, the Army Court of Criminal Appeals, and the Court of Appeals for the Armed Forces. And I had the fortune to argue a case in front of the Court of Appeals for the Armed Forces at Washington and Lee University, and we prevailed. So again, all of that was just by not being afraid to jump in there, embrace circumstances, study, learn, talk to people that had had that experience. I met so many good JAG lawyers that were military lawyers that we worked in the cases, and we became friends, and we worked on cases together. So again, it really does go to relationships. What relationships do you build with your community, relationships with other lawyers, and relationships with your clients?
And that's this idea that a single opportunity could come your way and would potentially take your career in a different direction or help your career to blossom. That's something that we've heard from a number of the legends during the program, but the key to it is, like you said, embrace it and give it everything you have. And then it leads you in these different directions where it sounds like you've traveled all over the country as a lawyer in one capacity or another, with your school board work and other positions. And I think at one point in time, you held a national leadership role with respect to school boards. Is that right?
That was when I was the national president for the National School Boards Association. And so we represented 95,000 school board members across the nation.
So there would be a lot of presentations at different locations across the country for that, right?
Absolutely.
So, well, and we should probably turn to just a brief discussion of specific professionalism type issues, and rather than going into any detail of any particular professional responsibility role, I'd be most interested in hearing your perspective on what you consider be the most important aspects of professionalism and your observations about how those matters have been handled through the years.
I think the number one thing I would say, and I try to preach this as a lawyer and as a legislator, is civility. We've become so divided in society anymore that, people get irritated and aggravated if you simply disagree with them. And I think that disagreement is healthy. When I first started practice, it was a lot easier, in my opinion. I don't want to be one of those guys that says, when I was born, I walked up the hill both ways to school and barefoot in the snow. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about those lawyers were willing. It was competitive, but they were willing to work with you. And you could call up an adjuster, or you could call up an attorney, and you could have a civil discussion and talk about strengths and weaknesses in your case and come to some kind of fruitful resolution. I've seen a lot of nastiness develop over the years when people get out, and I guess in an effort to try to prove themselves, they try to beat their chest and stake their territory and just are afraid or to admit any kind of weakness. And so I've been really concerned about just civility in general. I've noticed it even more in the legislature because, used to be you would work across the aisle. That was common to get things done. But now some people are so extreme that if you even talk to somebody in the other party, they're raising their eyebrows at you, thinking you're doing something suspicious. And that's just not the case. By and large, people in general want the same kind of thing. They want to be accepted. They want to be loved. They want to be successful. They want to have families. They want to enjoy life. They want to have multiple experiences. And to me, I want to help people get there, but you have to do that through civility and working with one another, not at odds with one another all the time. I always tell lawyers, I tell people all the time that we go to court and we do battle, and it's vicious battle at times. And then we go to dinner or we go to lunch, and that's perfectly fine. And we respect the gifts or the approach of the other attorney. But there's a lot of ways in today's world where I see that's not as common anymore. And people get so offended or so scarred by experiences that they don't want to have that engagement anymore. And I'm a little concerned about that, to be honest, not just in law, but in society at large. People have become more vitriol. They hide and they get behind a screen of a computer or email or social media, and they just ridicule and demean and denigrate people. And to me, that's not good for anyone or anybody. And
having a trusting relationship with even your opponent, it helps you to resolve a matter productively for all the parties. And that's one of the things that I'm seeing diminish. And fortunately for me, it's often or usually when I deal with someone outside of our region. I mean, in Northern Kentucky, we seem to treat each other for the most part with respect and civility, but yeah, it's and you can't resolve anything with those people.
And I think you're exactly right. That's why I'm honored to be part of this bar, because I can go through the book, the Bar Association book, and I can look at these people, and probably 80 or 90% of them I have good relationships with, and I can call them up, and if I need a continuance, there's no issue. If I need to, get some more time, there's no issue. The same with them if they're requesting that of me, absolutely no problem. I've been though against other lawyers in other communities. They won't ever give you a continuance. They won't ever work with you in any capacity. And all they want to do is fight and beat their chest for their client. And I've seen some lawyers, they consider themselves successful, but what they're really doing is they go in and scream and yell a lot. And even though they lose the case, I guess their client thinks they're fighting for them. And so they like their lawyer. And that's always amused me. To me, I'm more outcome driven, results driven. How can I come to in a situation like mediation, right? We always tell clients that a successful mediation is when both sides leave not really happy, but they can live with it because you came to a hard fought, but well thought out resolution to a problem. And, I just think that we need to get back to those kinds of relationships, and we need to be courteous to our peers. If somebody needs a continuance, unless it's just extreme. In other words, we have to talk to our clients, of course, but I always tell my clients, look, clients come and go, but my relationships with these lawyers is going to last for my entire career. So I'm not willing to burn those bridges with my colleagues because you got to burn yourself. And I just try to work through that problem with them.
Well, and we haven't spent much time talking about your service in the General Assembly. And to me, as we chatted briefly before the program, to me, this continues with the theme that the knowledge, skills, and abilities that you developed, they transferred into this leadership role that you have. And that's when things work best, when you've earned the opportunity and you're able to carry out true justice in your position and have a unique perspective. So if you could share with us how you came to be in the General Assembly and what leadership post you hold and how you're able to make a difference in those positions.
So a lot of people that know me forgot that I ran for state representative in 2004, and I was soundly defeated. And I lost by 800 votes in a primary. And I thought my career was over. I thought my political career was over. I was moaning and groaning, to which my dad said, you know what? That's probably the best thing that ever happened to you. God's got another plan for you. And I thought about that a lot. And as it turns out, he was exactly right. Looking back, that was one of the greatest losses that benefited me that I could ever appreciate. Had it not been for that loss, I would have not gone on to be the Kentucky School Board Association president and ultimately the National School Board Association president. And those experiences were like a proving ground or training ground for me to become a legislator today. Candidly, looking back, I wasn't ready to be a legislator in 2004. I arrogantly and pridefully thought I was ready, but I wasn't ready. I was young and I just wanted the accolades of being a legislator. Going through those experiences, when I had the option to run for the House in 2018, in that scenario, I didn't go looking for it. I felt like it came looking for me. And I ran and I was elected, and it was a pretty contentious matter because my predecessor decided very late in the ordeal that she was not going to run for office. I ran. Some people were upset with that. The governor campaigned against me, even though I was in his own party. And, you know, I still succeeded and became a legislator. And I looked at it and I began to think it's all those experiences that allowed me to rise above all of that contention and to fulfill what I believe was my destiny, to become a legislator. Now, at that time, I was a brand new legislator, but I didn't go in there with the attitude that, hey, I've been a lawyer for 25, 30 years, so I can, you know, I can run the show. I went in there my first year. I took some very wise advice from my colleagues who had served a while. And they said, you need to just learn and listen. Learn, build your relationships and listen and gain an appreciation for the process. So when I got to Frankfort, they immediately, because I was a lawyer, made me vice chair of judiciary. And I didn't even know the whole process of judiciary. But I worked very closely with Jason Petrie, who's now the chairman of A&R, Appropriations Revenue. And he's an attorney from down Todd and Logan County, and we became very good friends. And he kind of mentored me. Again, same process I went through before. I would go to these folks that have been there a while and say, hey, I'm new at this. Can you show me the ropes? And it came to me very easily. And I think the reason it came to me easily is because of the experiences that I had as a lawyer for the last many years. So he, after my first year, he actually elevated to A&R chair, and I was asked if I would serve as judiciary chair. And now it's just such an awesome experience to think that all of the things that I've experienced, I can use to impact policy for the good of our state, for the good of the bar. I can look out for the profession, and I get input from people all over the state about the practice of law. I work with the justices. I work with the Court of Appeals judges. Just last week, I had the opportunity to meet with one of the justices on evidence and rules, where they're trying to change some rules that we practice by. I actually was Justice Van Meter, and I also met last week with Justice Minton about how we're going to make sure we get judges in all the areas of our state that need them, because we still don't have family court judges in many areas. Some areas we still have a domestic relations commissioner. And so how do we make that work when we have some judges that are underworked and some judges that are overworked, but they're all making the same salary? And so those kinds of issues became very real to me because I've practiced in these courts. And so I've enjoyed that process immensely, working with other lawyers. I think I mentioned to you before, the other thing I learned is that I didn't know until I got down to Frankfort that practicing law without a license is only a Class B misdemeanor. And I thought, how denigrating is that to attorneys who have paid the price and went to undergrad and went to law school and, you know, fought battles in the trenches, and somebody that holds themselves out as a lawyer just gets charged with a misdemeanor. So we're working on a possible bill in the coming session that if it's a first offense, it'll be a Class A misdemeanor, but if it's a second offense or more, it'll be a felony. Again, trying to protect the integrity of the profession. There's not as many lawyers in the legislature as there used to be. And so one of the other experiences that I've had is that, like, I'm on a child support commission where we're trying to work about changing child support rules and regulations going forward. It's been 20 years since we'd had any major changes to our child support process. What I learned is that they went around the room and asked who had actually composed or done child support figures, and there was like two of us. And so to me, that was amazing, because I'm thinking, okay, the people that often make these decisions are far from the actual reality and practicality of how those decisions impact the local practitioner or the local judges. So what I've tried to do is create these groups where we seek input from other people, from judges, from practitioners, from county attorneys, from Commonwealth attorneys, and say, how is this really working? It's easy for us to go pass a bill, but what are the unintended consequences that occur? And so my practice for all these years now is gotten to where I feel like I am primed to be in the legislature and to make decisions that impact our bar, that impact the quality of life of lawyers and the practitioners that do this stuff every day. Because when you get down there, it's very diverse. You know, we have like 4 pharmacists, 5 ministers, 6 or 7 lawyers, business practitioners. But what I also have learned in the legislature is that when it comes to a legal issue, they will turn to the lawyers and say, what do you think? And so I really have a good opportunity to take what I've learned from all of my colleagues and mentors over the years and put it to practice to hopefully make life better for Kentuckians.
Well, and I think a lot of our attendees and viewers, if and when the videos are published, would be interested in knowing about criminal justice reforms that you've participated in a big developments in Kentucky over the last few years that you've been a part of. And I think one of the most interesting things about that is how so many different constituency groups came together, special interest groups came together to find something that everyone can work on, or most everyone can work on and support. So tell us a little bit about that, if you would.
So when I first got there, Chairman Petrie had talked about judicial reform for quite some time. You know, we pass laws and then they get on the books and then they are there, it seems like forever, and they can become stale. Well, as a practicing attorney, I'd had several clients that had theft by unlawful taking. And of course, if it was under 500, if it was a misdemeanor, but if it was over 500, it could be charged as a felony. And so in thinking about policy and Kentuckians and life, you know, a felony for many years was just a scarlet letter. So my first session in the House, I worked with Senator Jimmy Higdon on an expungement bill. And the expungement bill was that if somebody had done the crime and done their time, and 5 years had passed since they were off probation or parole, they could get their felony expunged. But if you think about that, it's still a 10-year process, because if you get a Class D felony and the sentence is 1 to 5, usually even if you serve some time, it's a 5-year probation. Then after the 5 years probation ends, it's another 5 years before you can file for expungement. So if you're a young man at 20 and you pick up a felony, then you may not be able to get that off your record till you're 30, which is halfway through the prime time of your work life. And it's impacted your ability to earn a living for your family, to provide for your community, because you had an indiscretion back when you were 20 years old and you stole something that was over $500. Now, stealing, and I think there should be accountability, but do we really want to give somebody a life sentence or a 10-year sentence, if you will, or even longer? Back then it was longer because expungement wasn't part of the plan. So we did that change, and then we started to think about our laws. And every state around us had raised their threshold to $1,000 or more for a theft before it became a felony. Just keeping up with the numbers of the economy at times, things are worth a lot more today than they used to be worth. Kind of like my dad bought a Mustang, I think back in the late 60s, I think he paid $2,300 for it. Well, you certainly can't buy that today for $2,300. So we began to look at that, and we brought all these groups in. We brought the retailers in. We brought the Commonwealth attorneys in. We brought the county attorneys in. And what I didn't know as a lawyer until I got to the legislature is the big fight in Frankfort seems to be over who's going to pay for the incarceration. So if they're a misdemeanor crime, the county pays for it. But if they're a felony, then the state pays for it. So believe it or not, there's a lot of people that were in opposition to changes, not because of good policy, but because they didn't want to be the ones to carry the bill. And the counties were worried that the bill was going to be shifted to them and they wouldn't be able to run their county government the way they needed to run their county government. So I didn't know that. And I'm like, to me, that just seems like a crazy way to decide good policy. So we brought all these people in, and ultimately it took us 2 years, but we got through the process and we got everybody to the same page that this needs to change. And we did change it, and we've not seen any terrific fallout since then. Now we're working on some additional changes with the Pew Forum about trying to help people, because so many of our people incarcerated are incarcerated for drug offenses or drug and alcohol offenses. And we are learning that incarcerating them is not going to heal them. It just punishes them for that offense. But there's a lot of recidivism when they get out because they've not received treatment. So now we're working on ways with the Pew Forum to create a pathway where we can get people into treatment and try to help people. And hopefully, you know, that person that's convicted, while somebody might say they're just a scum or a dirtbag, the truth is they're somebody's son or somebody's daughter. They're a human soul. They're a Kentuckian or a citizen. And we need to do what we can to try to give them a new opportunity, to give them hope. Because if they don't have hope, the likelihood of recidivism and repeat offenses is going to occur. So we're working on many things like that right now. And I've reached out to many colleagues in the law and asked them for their opinions, everybody from defense attorneys to Commonwealth attorneys. And it doesn't just deal with criminal law. It also deals with things involving what we would have been referred to as tort reform, you know. And so we've had to deal with a lot of those issues. And so I continue to reach out to the local bar, to the powers that be, and say, look, you've got experience in this area. I'm just a mouthpiece. I've been given the privilege, the wonderful privilege to be a mouthpiece for our community. What message do I need to carry? And so that's how I've used that position. And it's really been a rewarding experience. The most rewarding thing to me is I go down the hallway on my floor, and there's all of these black and white photographs of all these legislators that have served the last 100 years. And going back to what I started with is I'm like, I have no idea who that guy is. He's got a funny looking beard and he wears a weird hat, but I have no idea who he is. But he was one time a legislator that had a vote just like I did. But because he's dead and gone, all that really matters is what positive impact did he make for Kentucky. And so it humbles me in the sense of I'm honored to be in this position. I'm grateful to be in this position, but I understand that my time is limited. And when I pass from here, what good have we collectively done together to make Kentucky a better place to live?
Well, and we've got a few minutes left, and generally we offer the interviewed legend an opportunity to share a personal fact of some sort that might not be widely or generally known, an interest or you know, whatever it is that you'd like to share with us that might be unique and different about you and your approach and your life.
I don't know if it's unique or different, but I would say that the biggest thing in my life is I try to live it by priorities. And my priorities are the following three things. My faith, I'm a Christian. I'm very open about that. I don't try to push my faith or belief on others, but I believe that that's given me an anchor in my life to go back to. When I have those moments of despair or discouragement, I go to the Bible. I go to those moments of encouragement. The second thing is my family. I have an unbelievably supportive wife. I truly did marry a saint. We've been married now 33 years. I have 3 daughters that are 27, 25, and 22, and they are amazing. And 2 of my daughters are teachers. They both teach in Kenton County. One teaches 5th grade and one teaches 3rd grade. And my outlier is my middle child, and she is you'll laugh when I tell you this, but she is the conference planner and the financial director for the Tennessee School Boards Association. So they grew up in that environment, and that influenced their choice for their career. I also have a beautiful granddaughter named Blakely, and I have a grandson that's expected in early December. And so when I think about my life, my legacy, if you will, I just want to provide the best experience for my family that I possibly can. And then the third thing is my friends thereafter, my faith, my family, my friends. And so when I say friends, I don't think there's any strangers in my life. There's only people I haven't met. And I truly believe I can learn something from everybody. I can learn something from my Democratic friends across the aisle. I can learn something from the criminal clients that sit down before me that have had a torturous life that wound up in this charge they've received. But if you listen closely, you can learn something from them. I can learn something from those brilliant lawyers that have had tremendous success. And, you know, I don't want to be them. I want to be me, but I learn from them. And so I think those three anchors in my life, which is my faith, my family, and my friends, are what has allowed me to have a wonderful career. I believe I have many more years to go. I turned 54 on Thursday. And so, you know, I think I have a long career left as a lawyer, as a legislator, and unless I'm somehow taken from this earth. But I also believe in the brevity of life. So I lost an uncle a couple of weeks ago to COVID. And, you know, he was 75, but it kind of just came on him quickly and he passed. And I realized in just a moment's notice, everything that we strive for can be taken away from us in the blink of an eye. It could be a child, it could be a parent, it could be a friend. And I've lost several friends, you know, through this whole pandemic. And what I've learned is you really have to seize the moment of every day. You have to enjoy the day. Not everything is as bad as it may seem. You might have missed a deadline. I always tell people the only thing that can't be corrected is a blown statute of limitations. But the fact of the matter is you're going to have good experiences. You're going to have bad experiences. And the key to me is to learn from all of your experiences, because that's what makes you the whole person. You know, you can't understand the joy of victory unless you've understood the pain of defeat. And you can't understand what it means to overcome something unless you've been through those trials and in the trenches and have overcome it. And it's not always pleasant. I love the mantra of the Navy SEALs. They say their mantra is embrace the suck. So when sometimes the things just seem like they suck, it's just terrible, embrace it. Don't run from it. Deal with it. Get through it. And then you can say, you know, I had that experience and that made me a better person. And so that's what I hope to lead this life with. You know, not everybody is going to like me or I can't please everybody. And I know that. I'm just going to do the best I can with the facts that I have at the moment in time that I live, and try to impact people for the good as much as I possibly can. So, you know, whether I win, lose, or draw my next election, so to speak, my life will go on. My identity, I don't want my identity to be that I was just a lawyer. I don't want my identity to be that I was just a legislator. I want my identity to be that I was that I was faithful, that I had a wonderful family, and that I did what I could to make life better for more people. And that's what my legacy is. It's not all these other things.
Well, Ed, thank you so much for sharing and providing that guidance to the next generation of lawyers out there. Any final words of wisdom for them in particular?
Well, the only thing I would say is if you're a new lawyer, don't be afraid to go ask us old guys for help. I really consider myself as an educator as much as a lawyer. I really enjoy helping younger lawyers become better lawyers. I mean, there's a reward in that that's not monetary. It's just a fulfillment of that. I was blessed with this opportunity and I want to carry or pass that on, you know, pay it forward, if you will. And so I think most of us in our bar, at least in Northern Kentucky's bar, are willing to do that. I really haven't, there's a couple out there, and I'm not going to mention any names, but by and large, most people have been very, very good at giving of their time, giving of their talent, giving of even their treasures to help other people become better. And so I want to be a part of that group. I mean, everybody wants to be part of a team. And I think that I'm proud to be a local member of our Northern Kentucky bar. And even whether you're plaintiffs or defense, it doesn't matter to me. We're still all in this world together, and we've got to work together to make it all come out. So you got to take care of your clients, but you got to take care of those relationships for people that you will spend the rest of your career with.
Well, Ed, on behalf of the Northern Kentucky Bar, thank you so much for your service to the profession and your service to the community. I enjoyed the hour we spent together. You suggested we might, and I sure did. And I do not see any questions on the Q&A feature. I'm going to just verify. And our next point of business then is to just wrap up briefly with information for our attendees, our live attendees. Julie Jones is going to be sending the CLE information and attendance confirmation to you. And we hope you will join us for next month's program, which features Magistrate Judge Greg Wehrman. You know, this year in the program, we've heard from a chief state court judge. We've heard from corporate lawyers, labor lawyers, litigators, legislators. And that's the goal of the program, is to provide varied and different perspectives that we have, how we approach the practice of law, practice development, and trying to be the best lawyers that we can be. Please reach out to us with any suggestions you may have for future Legends programs and any suggestions about the format or other aspects of this program. And thank you again for attending, and have a wonderful day.